standard NPC here with another episode of What Is It Good For? Today we're discussing Hindsight 2020. Hindsight 2020 is an indie game developed and produced by III Games, a team of people who have previously worked on AAA games at BioWare and Sucker Punch. We're going to go over the gameplay, the story, the visuals, all to figure out what Hindsight 2020 is good for. While the gameplay in Hindsight 2020 is pretty basic, it still has a satisfying gameplay loop. The game is essentially broken up into rooms of various sizes and obstacles. Some will have you fighting enemies and others will have you solving puzzles. None of it is especially difficult, but it feels nice to unlock new abilities and become more powerful as you play. One of the defining features of the game is the choices you can make in combat. There's always an option between two playstyles, merciful and ruthless. With merciful combat, you use a stun baton until the enemies stop fighting you. The main challenge with this type of combat is that you're unable to strike a single foe more than once, forcing you to bounce off multiple enemies to perform combo attacks. Playing with the baton reminded me of a very simplified combat from Batman Arkham Asylum, where you jump between people to take down large groups. In contrast to merciful combat, you can choose to be ruthless. With ruthless combat, you use a sword instead of a stun baton. Fighting with the sword presents its own challenges. While you can focus on a single target, unlike the stun baton, the people you're fighting are going to be more prone to running away and keeping their distance. It just generally play more defensively. Each style has its own benefits and challenges, along with upgraded moves that you can perform when you gather enough energy. Despite neither combat proving to be a large challenge, the real draw from these two combat choices is how they can impact the story. Characters will react to how you choose to approach a situation, and the combat style you choose can sometimes lead to a larger consequence down the road. A small nitpick I have about the puzzles presented between the fights, beyond the lack of general challenge, was how they largely are inaccessible to those who are colorblind. While I personally didn't suffer from this, a major theme with the puzzles was moving colored blocks into the correct place to match a pattern. I checked the settings and I couldn't find any accessibility options. So while it might seem like a small thing, it could leave some people stuck and unable to progress properly. Overall, the gameplay in Hindsight 2020 is simple and not the most engaging, but the potential impact it has on the story is what makes it interesting. In Hindsight 2020, a plague has corrupted a portion of the population into monsters. Our hero, in an attempt to fight against the corruption, causes a calamity that destroys all he holds dear. The gods show pity, allowing the hero to go back in time and change the choices leading up to the calamity. Throughout your time playing the game, you'll make decisions that direct the progress of the plot, doing your best to make good choices and avoid repeating the calamity that took your home from you. As you play and experience the game with different choices and playstyles, you'll learn more about the world, the characters that inhabit it, and find that not all the problems presented to you are as black as white as they might first appear. While at first glance it might seem like your choices have a large impact on the story, with 10 different possible endings, there are clear spots where the story forks after playing it just for the first time. Overall, the story is fairly bland on the surface. If you dig a little deeper and go out of your way to obtain some collectibles with added context, it becomes a little more engaging, but only a little. The visuals in Hindsight 2020 are without doubt very distinct. It reminded me slightly of some animated children's shows with some of the character designs and art styles. Many of the levels seem to take place in an almost void. Lots of empty space leaves little to comment on as far as how they appeared. Character designs are serviceable. Visuals in this game do what they need to do, but not much more. I feel there was some wasted potential to flesh out the world more and tell a story through the environment. However, it is understandable that some polish had to be left out with such a small team working on the game. Overall, the visuals don't stand out against the competition. There were definitely missed opportunities to flesh out the world and make it feel more lived in with the design of the levels. As it stands, the locations feel disjointed, almost as if every level exists within its own little pocket dimension, separate from everything else. The choice-based narrative is ambitious and appealing on the surface. However, when you begin to peel away the layers, the story becomes bland, even with multiple endings. The lack of there being a clear moral choice is something I personally appreciate, but the execution of the mechanics could still use some work. As a proof of concept, though, the story and choices make me excited for a more polished experience from the studio. Fairly bland story that encourages you to play through multiple times does not mix well with a basic gameplay loop that feels less than rewarding. Both combat and puzzles are simple, and the lack of anything between puzzle and fight rooms make the gameplay feel tedious, especially when you play it for a second or third time. While the two different combat options work to alleviate this slightly, it still feels like an uninspired gameplay loop. You enter a room, you fight the people, you leave the room to go to a different room to solve a puzzle, and then you leave the puzzle room to go into a different room to fight more people. Overall, Hindsight 2020 misses the mark. The choice-based narrative is done incredibly well, but the supporting story and combat mechanics don't do it justice and make it difficult to push through and see all of the possible endings. And while I'm personally not impressed with the experience Hindsight 2020 has to give, I am excited for other games that might come from the studio if they manage to take the narrative choice found here and polish it with either a more engaging story or a more fleshed out combat. Hindsight 2020 is good for if you want to support AAA games and are able to shift through straightforward puzzles and combat to discover all the possible endings to a fairly bland story. It's available on all platforms right now for $15. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. It really does help the channel grow and it would be greatly appreciated.